Well, I'm going to read a poem from the new book, Reading Moby Dick and various other matters. And this is a piece called The Allotment Poems. And I think this is a favourite poem of my good friends Dave Belbin and Sue Dimmock. And in fact, when I gave Dave the book when it came out, he leafed through it and he said, "Oh, the Allotment Poems are in it." So I'm going to dedicate this to Dave and Sue. And it's how many? It's 10 little short pieces called The Allotment Poems. 1. Say all you want about carrots, but there's nothing like a young sweet one pulled fresh from the rich earth. 2. When the wind whips around the Brussels sprout plants, we are reminded of how often we make our own problems. 3. The difficulty of the tomato is not really a difficulty at all. We, all of us, need sun and rain. So much depends upon it. Loves a house of glass. 4. Onions may give you the runaround, but you soon find out who your wife might be. I actually don't understand that one, but don't understand most of them. 5. Courgettes may well cause arguments, but we are not children, are we? Though we love the rain. 6. What do you mean? Cabbages remind me of Russia. 7. So we were sitting around very much in the manner of potatoes. Suki mentioned the coach, but she meant the couch. When you dig them up and the earth is under your fingernails, what, said Suki, has that got to do with the coach? 8. A lot of people disrespect kale. You know, one day kale was out shopping and spinach just cut her cold. What the hell? Kale is tasty as spinach. I've had her. I love her. All of us in Kale City love her tasty curliness. 9. There was rhubarb in the corner of our patch. It was there when we arrived, and it will be there when the world ends. You can't get rid of rhubarb, but then you wouldn't want to. Rhubarb crumble being the modern equivalent of ambrosia. 10. Asparagus, a rare, almost exotic delight. Occasionally I treat myself from the organic shelf at the supermarket. But nurture and tend her day after day, I'm not enough of a man, though I do, from, call it deference, leave a small place where she could be.
Thank you so much. They're lovely. I was reading your elephants blog. I can't remember the full title of it.
1 million elephants couldn't begin to understand.
Yeah, earlier today, and I just love the way that you put small chunks of words together that say so much.
They that began as something which was designed to make me write every day. I think I started about 9 years ago, and so that would have been 2011ish, and when I was in China, and I just used it as a prompt to sit down every day and just make up something, you know. And it's not quite doing that these days because I tend to do 3 or 4 at a time and schedule them and stuff. But it's still, a lot of the stuff on there is still stuff which just comes into my head and then may turn into a poem at some point, or, you know, a trigger for a poem or something. And some of it's just silly and some of it, you know, it's just words, isn't it? You know?
Yeah, it all provokes thought though, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
So you are a poet, you have written a lot of criticism, you've taught widely across the world. When and how did you first know that you were actually a writer?
Well, I've thought about this because I knew you were going to ask me this. And I came up with some fairly complicated answers. And one of them involved saying that if anybody asks me what I do, I never say I'm a writer, because they ask you what you write, and then you have to say so you might as well jump to the poet bit straight away. And that raises its own problems, which we could maybe discuss later. But I then also thought, like, what's the difference between knowing you're a poet and thinking you're a poet, you know? Because I began writing poems when I was at school, as you know, lots of people do. And I wrote absolute drivel for a decade. you know. And I don't think I thought I was a poet then, you know. But then when I was 27, 28, something like that, I went to a poetry workshop, kind of out of character, but I went to a poetry workshop, which was run by some really good poets. So I met poets who were kind of publishing in kind of good places. And that kind of changed my life in a way. So I took my terrible poem along to this poetry workshop and, you know, went home in tears. And but then I went back the next week, and I went back for the next couple of years. And I mean, within weeks, I was kind of reading poems in upstairs rooms at pubs and stuff, you know. And so I probably thought I was a poet then. And I mean, this is the late 1970s, yeah. And after a year or two, I thought I was enough of a poet to start my own magazine, which I did, Joseph's Canoe, as you may know. So I definitely thought I was a poet then. I then went to university as a mature student. I was married. I had 2 young children. They were born in 77, 78. I went to uni as a mature student because I lost my job. And at that time, the government paid all your fees and everything. So it was a good deal, you know, they paid for the family and everything. So I went to uni for 4 years. And when I came out of that, I'd been publishing, you know, I had the magazine, which was still going on. And I still figured, okay, I'm still a poet. But because I had the magazine and, you know, I was publishing a bit, I was able to get writing work, you know, writing residencies and schools visits and stuff. So, you know, definitely a poet now, you know, because you're introduced as the poet, you know, so you are, aren't you? But looking back, and I don't want to kind of get too heavy here, but, you know, I was in a very domestic situation. I was married, I had young children. My wife was actually the main breadwinner. She was self-employed and she was earning quite good money. And I was this guy who was, you know, occasionally I got a bit of work, you know, did a residency or went out to a school for a day. But otherwise I was the house husband, basically, you know, thinking well, you know, I'm a poet, but I'm also the house husband. And it occurs to me that really, probably, apart from the times when I went out to be a poet, most of the people in my immediate environment probably thought of me as, well, that guy who doesn't work and, you know, goes around the school and picks up the kids in the afternoon and needs a haircut, you know. But time moved on. And by that time, the mid-80s, I kind of, you know, my poetry world had expanded. I knew some guys in New York, you know, some of the New York poets. I actually knew them, you know, I'd been there and I met them. So my world was expanding in that sense. But then in the late 80s, I actually got a job. I was living in Suffolk at the time, and I got a job for Ipswich Borough Council. I was their community arts worker, their one community arts worker.
Yeah.
You know? But for the next 3 or 4 years, I was really kind of involved in the arts actively. You know, I was the guy in Ipswich organising gigs, exhibitions, all kinds of activity. I worked with the council's exhibitions officer who had control of the 2 art galleries. So I was meeting artists. I ran a poetry reading series. So there was loads of stuff going on, you know, and I was really, really busy. And well, to cut a long story short, you know, I mean, my life had really changed and I wasn't really feeling very domesticated. And without going into too many personal details, I found myself having to make some really rather large decisions, you know, about what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go with my life, you know. And I took a big decision, which was a very difficult decision. And it was at that point, when I look back, I think that, and this sounds very serious, but I think poetry went from being something which I had to fit into my life, I think from that point, my life had to be something which had to fit around poetry, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you know, I made a very big decision then, which obviously, you know, well, it was painful for me and painful for my family, you know. But from that point on in my life, every big decision I've made, poetry has played a major role, because this is what I do, you know, for better or for worse, this is what I do. So it goes from being, well, this is what I do and I'm going to fit it in somehow. I'm sorry, you're going to have to fit in with this, you know, because that's what I do. So, yeah, so that's quite a convoluted and kind of odd answer maybe, but so really from that point on, as I say, every major decision has been based on the fact that this is what I do, and whether it's for good or bad, you know, it's what it is, you know. So, and so there's a commitment there, you know, which, you know, at some point I had to make, to kind of figure that if I want to be me, I've got to do this, you know, as opposed to, you know, putting it to one side sometimes because, you know, I can't do, sorry, you're going to have to take this poet on board, you know, and that's it, you know.
Yeah, it's I guess you kind of reevaluate your priorities as you go through, don't you?
Yeah, and it's really difficult because, you know, I know you know, people talk about art and artists. I mean, it's a kind of a selfish life, you know. It is selfish, you know. You have to kind of, you know, you shut yourself away, you go and do your thing, and that's kind of can be quite difficult for the people around you, you know. But you do put it first, you kind of have to, and you have to strike some kind of balance. And I mean, I thought about this in the last few days, and I mean, obviously I know people who do their art and they have very settled, as far as I can tell, domestic lives, and, you know, they're happy and they can do it, you know. I've never been quite that fortunate, which obviously has something to do with, you know, my character and everything else, you know. So
that's interesting. I want to pick up on that, and I'm going to jump ahead in the questions to the one about writing community, because you say being a writer is selfish and you do it on your own in isolation, but I think the writing community around most writers is kind of a vital support mechanism. I don't know if you find that at all.
I'm what's the word, equivocal, is that the right word? I'm not sure if equivocal, I know where support comes in. So if I think about locally in Nottingham, for example, I mean, I've only actually lived in Nottingham for, well, quite a short time. I mean, I moved up here in the early 90s, but I always lived outside of Nottingham, lived towards Mansfield and Southwark and what have you. And I only actually lived in the city for a couple of years before I went to China in 2005. And Five Leaves didn't exist then. So there was none of the activity that we have now. And I knew a few people, but that was it. And I've been back from China for a couple of years now, and obviously you've got Five Leaves, which Andrew Taylor described the other day as a social hub, which it absolutely is, you know. So, but because I haven't really been here very long, I kind of know more people by sight than I probably know well, you know. But having said that, there are people here that I do know quite well, and I kind of see quite often, you know. But that kind of world, you know, that community, as you call it, I mean, I know it's really supportive, I know it's really good, but I kind of feel, I don't know, it's quite not ambivalent about it, because I know it's important, you know. I mean, I grew up in a poetry workshop, for God's sake, you know, so, and that was a poetry workshop that was really tough and had about 20 people in it, and, you know, I know how important that stuff is, you know, but you know, I've been doing this for 40 years now, And you know, I've got friends who are poets scattered around the country and, you know, across the Atlantic. And I don't know if support is the right word. They're just there. They're friends who I've known for donkey's years. And, you know, I know that we like each other's work. I don't know what support I need, you know, but I do understand that support is really important at all kinds of levels. So I'm going to go to Five Leaves and support what Five Leaves does. And, you know, when I did the book launch a couple of weeks ago with Lauren Terry, you know, it's brilliant that Lauren can do that. And I will always, you know, encourage that stuff to happen. But does it sound naff to say I don't need support?
Not at all, not at all. I guess, so maybe it's like other aspects of the community, like sort of being sociable and just talking to other writers who understand what you're talking about and don't look at you like you're totally mad.
And it's, you know, as I say, I mean, to go to an event of Five Leaves, that is like really important, just to kind of, you know, see people who I don't know really well, but I do know, and have a chat, and you just kind of feel like, you know, well, it's a social thing, isn't it? And you kind of, you know, pat each other on the back, and you go home feeling a bit better, you know. But it's, I mean, I did, in this context, I did want to draw your attention. I mean, you probably haven't read this, but it's in the new book. There's a sequence of poems called View, and it's a sequence of 20 poems, and each of those poems has a very brief quotation in it. And most of the quotations I've actually forgotten where they came from because I took them from random, but one of them is Byron, okay? And this is the quotation, and I'm going to read it. It says, "In general, I do not draw well with literary men, not that I dislike them, but I never know what to say to them." And, you know, I use that because I do kind of have that problem. I kind of find it easier to talk to people about almost anything except, you know, poems, because all my really good friends who are, you know, we never talk about poems, or very rarely. We talk about the football, you know, because we know about the poems, we know what we think about it, you know. But I cut that quotation short from Byron because the full quotation is, "In general, I do not draw well with literary men, not that I dislike them, but I never know what to say to them after I have praised their last publication." Which is a brilliant quotation, isn't it? Absolutely brilliant, you know.
I love it.
But, you know, so I do, I mean, yeah, I mean, the community is important, and I'm never going to kind of diss it, you know. And I'll go and support poetry readings, you know, sometimes when I don't even like the poetry, you know. These things are important. And as I say, I grew up in a workshop kind of started all of this for me, you know, and I know how much that support was important. And I've run workshops since then, and I think I've done a lot to actually help people, you know, and push people along. The fact that I don't really do much of that these days is by the by, you know. So
well, yeah. You've done that, and you are where you are now. So what?
I'm old now, you know. I haven't got the energy. You know?
So what are you working on at the moment?
Oh well, I mean, nothing specific. I mean, I've just got a few bits and bobs, poems kicking around, just the way it always is, you know. There's, I've been fortunate. I mean, I've had. This sounds crazy, but I've had 3 books published since October, and I'm not going to think about books now. I'm just going to let things drift along, you know. Why wouldn't I? So, but that's how it's always been, you know. There's always kind of poems on the go, and I don't spend hours sat at the desk every day. I don't think that's how poets work. It's certainly not how I work, you know. But yeah, there's a little pile of stuff over there on the desk, you know.
Has some lockdown affected your writing life at all?
No. Well, no. I mean, I've been quite lucky because I mean, to be honest, I mean, I'm retired, you know, so actually not going out of the house for a day or two really doesn't make, you know, practical, I mean, obviously it makes a difference, I mean, the fact that when you do go out, you've got all these concerns and everything else, and it's put the kibosh on the social life, such as it is, I mean, I don't have a massive social life, but I miss going out for a cup of coffee with Alan Baker or seeing Maria Taylor or whatever it might be, but other than that, in practical terms, it hasn't really made significant difference. I mean, it's been more of a kind of a background issue. There's a shadow hanging in the background. And one of my sons, I mean, I've got 2 grown-up sons, and one of them lives in Argentina. And I mean, they're still in lockdown in Argentina. I mean, they've been in lockdown they've got a 10-month-old baby, and they're in serious lockdown still. So, that kind of stuff is always in your head, yeah. But, in practical terms, apart from, the things we've all had to do. And it hasn't, I mean, I'm not the kind of poet who sits down and, I'm going to write a poem about COVID-19.
Thank goodness for that.
So, so no, I've just kind of got on with it. And I kind of, I did see one day, the City of Lit, the Nottingham City of Lit website had writers writing about their life in lockdown, and someone said, writers at this time, they either can't write or they must write about this, or something along those lines. It was certainly like, I think most of it was, you can't write during this time, it's impossible to write. And I said to Dave Belbin, I said, I just don't agree with that, and because I've got this imagination which I can't turn off, and I'm 67 years old, and my imagination is rooted in all that life, and so I wish I could turn it off sometimes, But so I've just got on with it, really,
Yeah.
So
you've not found anything's particularly struck you about the situation that might have inspired something?
No, I don't really think I have that. That's life, and what happens in it kind of filters through into the work, as opposed to, and it will crop up in odd, unexpected places. Because, most of the time, I don't know what a poem is going to be until it appears, and so, a strand of this experience could pop up in a line somewhere, as opposed to, well, I walk up the road and people are polite and step off the pavement, or they're not polite and don't step off the pavement. That in itself isn't going to show up, but that kind of experience is going to feed into what I write. I mean, good, decent, sensible people and morons. But life's always been like that, hasn't it?
Yeah, I suppose it's, if you look at it like that, it's just an experience, same as any other, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's
I mean, and yeah, so there's loads of other stuff going off which I wouldn't want to, diminish in any way at all. But as I say, that's not really the way my mind and my poetry works. But it will show up. And in fact, I drafted something yesterday where the gathering of people in numbers when they shouldn't gather appeared in this draft that I wrote, and I'm not desperately happy with it as a piece of writing, but that idea may linger, and still appear in something. So that's how it works with me, So,
yeah, that's interesting.
And we all work in different ways, and that's just the way my imagination and my whatever it is functions.
Yeah, I mean, I guess everyone's unnecessarily affected by their experiences and what's going on around them and stuff. It's just the way that we incorporate it into our works.
Yeah, sure.
Very different for different writers, isn't it?
Yeah, and where your life has been, and where this fits into the scheme of things, and have you experienced things which are also pretty bloody horrible, or is this the first time you've ever had any kind of serious thing to deal with, and as I say, I wouldn't, this has obviously been despairingly horrible for lots and lots of people, and I've been very fortunate to escape it, and nobody in my, family or anybody I know has suffered, so I'm very fortunate in that respect, just the way it is, so.
Yeah, I don't know, I mean, even if, I haven't been particularly affected, but there's this kind of sense of unreality about the whole thing.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
It's been leaking into anything I've written. Just this sort of surreal nature of what's going on. Yeah. It's normal, but not normal. And
that's fair. Yeah, that's fair enough. I can understand that. But then I suspect that people who know my work will say, well, that sense of unreality is kind of lurking around there anyway. And,
there is that.
And to be honest, that's a little bit how sometimes I think, life, sometimes you couldn't make it up, so, yeah.
Yeah. Is there any particular person who's inspired your writing?
Oh, well, people. I mean, I'm sure you probably know from, that the New York poets have really kind of been important to me. And not just the names that people normally reel off, the Frank O'Haras and the John Ashberys. I mean, I was lucky enough to meet a guy called Paul Violi, who is sadly no longer with us. And he was a great friend, a brilliant poet from New York. And that circle, I was lucky enough to meet Kenneth Coke and spend some time with him for a week or so. And those people, I'm totally in awe of, and the fact that they took me seriously was both inspiring and, kind of. So yeah, I kind of go back to those people. And in terms of contemporary poetry, I suppose I just have to name them, and that whole kind of, it's not a school, but that whole kind of area, of a certain strand of American poetry is very important to me.
What is it about it that?
Well, I think it kind of comes into. There's a poet called Charles North who I've just interviewed, and by the time you put this online, the interview will have appeared on Alan Baker's Litter magazine, and he's one of that group. He's second generation New York school, I guess, because he won't mind me saying he's quite elderly now. And I interviewed him, and I mentioned the word sensibility at some point, because I was asking him about when he started writing in the the late 60s maybe, can't remember the exact date, but he was going to workshops with Kenneth Coke, Coke was teaching, and Tony Tull, who is the same generation as Charles. And I asked him about whether when he went there and he was starting writing, what was it that kind of, did he have that kind of sensibility, or did he kind of pick it up from them, And he kind of picked up the word sensibility, and he wasn't very happy with it. Although his great friend Tony Tull had actually talked about sensibility to him. And I think it is sensibility, It's that sense that, well, I mean, it's easy to say poems can do anything, but the fact that you can be yourself, you can be funny, you can be serious, you can be daft, you can be all those things. That they kind of taught me to trust myself, and not give a damn about what anybody else thinks. Although I do care what other people think, obviously, but there also comes a point where I don't, So, and I was interested when you were talking to Andrew Taylor, and I told you, Andrew and I are good friends. He lives down the road, and he was talking about, sharing poems with other poets, kind of saying, what do you think? And, what do you think about this line? Or what do you think about this or that? And I never do that, I never do that. It's 100% down to me, because I think I have it might be a misguided sense that however close I am to someone else as a poet, they will not quite get what I want, from this particular poem. So whilst I would respect what they say and would always, there are poets that I would always respect what they say, it's down to me to make that kind of decision. So I don't kind of share works in progress and stuff like that. So I think the New Yorkers and looking back, I mean, it doesn't matter where you go. I mean, I'm a great fan of Coleridge, basically believe in yourself and what you do, and having said that, I know that comes from age and experience and where you've been and who you've encountered, and stuff like that, but I mean, Frank O'Hara, with his tongue in his cheek, said any silly idea in my head is better than any idea in your head, and I know what he meant, and he didn't mean it literally, but it was that stuff about trusting and being yourself, so and I mean, I don't want to sound, I mean, it probably will sound arrogant, but when we did the book launch a couple of weeks ago online, and Alan Baker introduced me and said he didn't know anybody who wrote like I write, I mean, to me, that's really important, a really important thing. And I can remember going to a poetry reading, or staging a poetry reading actually, way back when I was in Ipswich, and I put on a reading with a couple of poets who then lived in Huddersfield, Keith Jaffray, Jeff Hattersley, and there was someone else. And I remember Keith Jaffray getting up and doing his poems and saying to the audience, what you're hearing tonight is three individuals, three individuals, very different. The fact that they're individuals is absolutely vitally important, and they're being themselves. And that's always stuck with me, because it is very important, very important.
Yeah. So. It's a hard lesson to learn because you kind of start by emulating other people.
Absolutely,
and then developing the confidence and your own voice.
For sure, yeah.
Really
I mean,
hard.
you start off imitating the people you really like, and you I mean, that's part of the process, isn't it? But it's part of the work, but you hope that at some point you kind of absorb the things that are important to you, the things that matter, and you kind of absorb and develop and also at some point become you. But all this, I mean, it's all very vague and wishy-washy, but I kind of believe that, and it's a long process, I mean, talking about myself, I mean, I started writing poems seriously, as I say, in the late 70s. And I was publishing in little magazines for well over 10 years before, as I look back now, I begin to see, that's when I began to kind of get it, when I began to kind of, develop anything that could remotely be called me, well over a decade, probably longer than that, as I say, it's a long, hard process in many ways.
Yeah. So what are you most proud of in your writing career?
Oh, goodness me. I have no idea. I think actually being taken seriously by poets I am in awe of matters, and so that's good. I look back at some poems and I think, wow, did I write that? There are some poems when I think that, there are, but I don't know how. I don't actually know how to answer it because, no, I don't know how to.
It's a hard question.
Yeah, but as I say, as a poet who is not, I mean, I'm not particularly well known. I've never been in, major anthologies and all that stuff. But I'm flattered that there are people who like what I do, and the fact that some of those people are really good poets, not just me thinking that, but you know, they're there and they have, you know, the track record and the reputation that matters to me, you know. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the better answers to that question I've heard, actually, to be honest.
But I don't know. I mean, pride, isn't pride one of the deadly sins? You know. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I was talking. I can't remember who I was talking to a little while ago, and they just said, but this kind of came up about, you know, reputation, and they said, well, you know, it's being respected and admired by your peers and by the people that you admire and respect. You know?
Yeah.
And nothing else. You know, I'm not going to win any prizes. You know, and I'm not going to, you know, nobody's going to give me loads of money for doing this stuff. All that really matters to me now is doing it as well as I can. Enjoy myself. Yeah? Enjoy myself.
Yeah. So that kind of leads into, what do you hope to achieve in the future?
Enjoy myself.
Enjoy yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, writing for me is, as I say, it's something that I can't stop doing because it just happens and it's there. It's what I am. And I want to produce good work, you know, and end of story, you know. Boring question, boring answer rather, but you know, that's it. You
question
know?
in a lot of cases,
But that's it. You know, that's it. End of. You know, I want to write a good poem, a poem that makes me happy, smile, and move on to the next one. You know, so
yeah, that's a brilliant place to end the interview.
All right.
Have you got a short reading to read us out with?
Oh yeah. Let me just get the book. I'm going to read a poem from the book. Has this reading Moby Dick thing. Has a couple of long poem sequences in it, and this sequence is called it's either called Design and Layout or Layout and Design. I can never remember. Design and Layout. And I'm just going to read one of these. It's number 19. Yeah, okay. And actually, I noticed that when I decided to read this poem, we were talking about the lockdown and COVID and stuff. And I wrote these poems, or this sequence, this time last year. And this poem actually mentions vaccinations and bacteria, you know, and you just think, well, isn't life weird? Anyway, this is number 19 of this sequence. The glass you use when combing your golden locks appears to be reflecting a bemused head. If you've only come here for the view, take particular note of the fluting at the coast, where traces of microbe culture are discernible to the truly observant. The rewards of spare time writing can be very substantial. Wrap your legs around the philosophy of modern art and thrust as if you are determined to somehow force your way inside it. Before submitting to the pressures of life, consider what it means to live as if you don't give a damn. On a clear day, you can just about make out why you came. When you decide to delete certain unsavory photos from your phone, try to do so without a sense of guilt. In the late afternoon sunshine, all the old people of the neighborhood come out to play. Writing is the most fascinating and stimulating of hobbies. If you have only come here to make fun of the inhabitants, take particular note of the stunted, one-legged, deaf in one eye, mixed race, gender indeterminate mute who runs the bridge club. Vaccination against flying bacteria is advised. To be awake is to be faced with an endless supply of questions. Be sure to renew your membership before it's too late and all the entrances and exits are blocked off. If you've only come here to fill a void, then you should leave now and make way for fresh talent. The modern approach to carving out some kind of space for oneself may strike one as too selfish and uncaring, but life is no picnic. Hushed conversations suggest something is building. Holding up a mirror to what's going on around may or may not provide some answers.